In this video, we're going to continue taking a look at SDK generation platforms, the fast-growing approach to building, managing, and maintaining SDKs for your APIs. Coming up, we're going to get an overview of Stainless, a platform that has just raised a $25 million Series A and is currently providing SDKs for customers such as Cloudflare, OpenAI, and Anthropic. We're going to be joined by their engineering manager, Alex Arena, to get an overview of the platform and take a look at some of the SDKs that they generated for one of their customers, Browserbase. If SDK generation, API development, and best practices are the kind of thing that you're looking for, then this is the channel for you. Subscribe for weekly videos on all things API. Let's take a look at Stainless.
Stainless is all about helping you ship like really incredible APIs. And so, if you take a step back all the way to the founding, our founder, whose name confusingly is also Alex, the other Alex was doing a bunch of like developer experience stuff at Stripe. So he was in charge of their SDK generation. He actually made a patented system at Stripe for SDK generation, which of course we don't use exactly because it's patented by Stripe. But then he was also on their documentation team and making their docs really excellent. And I think what he realized working at Stripe was, Stripe has this best-in-class DX because they invested really heavily in it. Like, his sort of full-time job was making really incredible DX for Stripe. But a lot of the stuff that he was doing could actually be generalized to other companies. And so that was kind of like the founding mission of Stainless is like, what are the things that we can sort of productize that make really incredible API developer experience possible? And that's, both for, if you're an engineer at a company and you want to ship really great SDKs, then Stainless is going to, make that really easy for you. So we have really great developer experience for our customers. But probably the most important thing, the thing that you're probably most concerned about as an engineer at a company is like, how do we give our customers the best possible experience using our APIs?
Can you show us what the process is like for somebody coming in with their OpenAPI document for the very first time and how that's going to look for them if they decide to go down the route with Stainless of generating an SDK?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually taken the liberty. I reached out to one of our most recent customers, a company called Browserbase. They're super cool. You should definitely use them. It's basically like headless browsers as a service. So if you're familiar with like Puppeteer, they kind of offer this as a service. And I picked Browserbase because Browserbase basically reached out to us on like a Friday night and said, "Hey, we really want SDKs." They signed up for the product, and we didn't quite realize this when they were doing it. They were like, "We really want to ship quickly." It turns out Monday morning they announced their Series A and their SDKs powered by Stainless as a part of that Series A. So this was all a part of their push to have the product ready for their big Series A announcement. So they went from thinking we might want SDKs on a Friday night to like Monday morning, here's our Series A and our SDKs powered by Stainless. So I reached out to them and got permission to use their OpenAPI spec. So I'll give you like a real world example from like a real Stainless customer of how they use the product.
You have to wonder whose to-do list item was it that said build SDKs that got left until Friday afternoon and they were like, oh no.
I would like to believe that they knew that Stainless existed and they had such high confidence in our service that they were like, this can be left until Friday because it's basically like a pretty instant process. Our product is sort of the two big ways that you interface with Stainless are through our studio and then actually just like through GitHub. We have a bunch of, we've got a GitHub app and a bunch of integrations with GitHub. So once you're done your initial setup in the studio, if you prefer to like work in like a primarily Git-based workflow, like that's kind of the majority of the time that you're interfacing with Stainless is it's just doing stuff in the background through like GitHub actions for you. But yeah, so I've got my organization spun up here. I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call this the Browserbase demo. I'm going to upload their OpenAPI spec. And then, yeah, it's going to take a minute or two, and this is going to go through and do all of like the kind of initial SDK creation for you. Again, all generated from that OpenAPI spec. So yeah, we say it takes a few minutes. I think in reality, it'll take like hopefully sub 60 seconds. But it is generating an entire SDK for you in both Node and Python to start. So it's pretty solid. So anyway, so it's been created here. I'll hop into the studio for the Node SDK. I'm like my whole startup before this was all node based. So node is where I'm like most comfortable working in. But you can see the kind of the core of the Stainless product is like it's a 3-pane experience. So here we've got like the preview of the generated SDK. Here's the configuration file. So we've got an OpenAPI spec, which is the thing that we uploaded. And then we generated this thing called the Stainless config for you, which is kind of where you add the stuff that doesn't make sense in the OpenAPI spec. So here, like the name of the NPM package and so on. We generate that all for you, but you can kind of customize it however you like. And you can see basically like the initial SDK and the documentation for it's been created. So you can see like all of they've got the notion of projects and extensions and sessions and all that's been created for you. Even things like sub resources are all here as well. But if you go to this like create a context thing, you can see like full documentation. This is like kind of like the quality that you'd expect of like an API reference doc that you could publish to your own site if you wanted to. And then you can see there's even things like code snippets. So for the TypeScript SDK, it's created this client.context.create call is like right here for you. And so that's kind of like how you preview the generated SDK. The other thing that I wanted to just like quickly show off is we've got this builds pane here. We've given you some diagnostics. So, to the question of like, how did Browserbase think they could do this, in a weekend or less? One of the things is they have a great OpenAPI spec. There's a couple issues with it. So a couple things, like ambiguous schemas and having like paginated methods that aren't marked correctly. And so we'll give you these like warnings in these notes to basically say, both for Stainless's benefit, but also for the benefit of other OpenAPI consumers, we'll kind of like give you hints as to how to improve your OpenAPI spec. But the good news is these are only kind of warnings and notes, so they're not going to block any of the creation of the SDK. And you can see we've got the code gen here. Of course, it's completed with those couple warnings, which we expected. But the other really neat thing is like Stainless is kind of managing the entire SDK process for you. So it's not just a thing that takes in an OpenAPI spec and spits out some files on your disk. We're actually like running through basically a full CI pipeline for your SDKs. So I've got the code gen step, I've got the lint step here. So this is, of course, we want to lint the code that we generate for you, but we also have custom code that you can sort of apply yourself. So we'll lint that as well to make sure that all looks and works correctly. And then I think one of the coolest things is we actually spin up a mock API server for you and then test your SDKs against that mock API server. So by the time you're ready to publish your SDK to like NPM or PyPy or whatever, you have like confidence that like a full suite of like automated tests have been run for you. So yeah, so once these run, I would feel pretty comfortable, going ahead and publishing the SDK. Other things to just quickly show off for you. Of course, I've uploaded the OpenAPI spec just from my disk, and that's like a good way to get started with Stainless. But in most cases, you're going to want to basically provide this to us in an automated way. So if I go back over to the OpenAPI spec tab and click the automate button, you can see you basically have two options. One is that you can set up our GitHub action, which is basically the recommended path. And then we'll just pull in OpenAPI changes as you commit them to GitHub. The other thing you can do is if you publish your OpenAPI spec, publicly, you can just give us the URL of it, and we'll just periodically fetch that. And then whenever there's changes, we'll kick off new builds of your SDK for you, and then open PRs for you with the changes that are downstream of your OpenAPI spec changes. But yeah, so once the tests are finished running, then we really could actually just go ahead and publish this. Of course, I won't, because I think that would cause some confusion for Browserbase's customers. But the other thing that we're doing here is we've created a staging repository for you. So you can see this is like the Browserbase demo node repository. And this is actually like the complete source code in Git of the SDK that we've generated. And to the question about how quickly you can work with Stainless and also like how polished the output product actually is, one of the things you'll notice is we generate like really excellent readmes for your library. So in this case, we give you the npm install instructions. Because this is just the staging one, you can install directly from the GitHub repository. Of course, once we publish to npm, this would just change to like npm install Browserbase or something. But then there's full API documentation, both in the API.markdown file, but also in this like initial README of how your customers can use your SDK, their request and response types they'd expect, really extensive documentation around handling errors, including what all the codes mean, explanations of our retry logic. So again, this is like really robust code that we're generating for you. So we have things like exponential backoff implemented, documentation around timeouts, and then even like way more advanced stuff. And you kind of get all of this for free. So it's much more than just the really simple sort of take an OpenAPI spec and then generate a workable SDK client, which is kind of what the open source solutions do. Like we're really kind of like singularly focused on making something that actually is production ready. And to kind of like, I thought this was a fun example to show you like a real customer. So this is the staging one that we've created that we're obviously not going to publish. But then if you hop on over to the published, this is Browserbase / SDK node. So this is their Stainless generated SDK. You can see like, the Stainless app is in here making commits and updates for them automatically. But the really cool thing is you can see the README looks quite similar to the one that we generated for them. So our real customers, the people who are getting like real value out of Stainless today, are kind of using like the full, the fact that we've gone through and thought about a lot of, what should be in your documentation for you, and they're just going straight to production with it. And it's pretty production ready stuff. The only other thing that I think is probably worth showing off here, we've showed off builds, showed off the OpenAPI spec. Of course, we out of the box generate for you Node and Python, but we've got Go, Java, and Kotlin in, pretty much ready to go state. So Go is actually, anyone can use it. Java and Kotlin, if you request access, will probably give you access. Same thing with Ruby and Terraform. And then we've got some other SDKs that are in even earlier development. But the goal for us is to really get, full language coverage, where it's like, any language that your customers might want to use your SDK in. Like the goal of Stainless is, of course, to like provide those.
Awesome. And the README's really nice touch as well. How much of that is based on having a good OpenAPI specification, right? If you put in something that was less complete but still good enough to generate an SDK, would the quality of that README documentation change at all?
Not very much, because a lot of it is actually based on the really good stuff that Stainless is doing for anyone, kind of regardless of OpenAPI specification. So like, the exponential backoff and the retry logic, that sort of stuff, that's not as dependent upon the OpenAPI specification. Where your OpenAPI spec being worse could like negatively impact you would be in like the sort of full API reference that we generate. So, like this saying create a context here. If your spec was, really not very good, these might look a little bit worse. And the good news is, of course, like we would sort of recommend that you probably just try and improve the OpenAPI spec. A lot of our customers are automatically generating these anyway. You're using like Fast API or something, and it's giving you your OpenAPI spec as an output. So I would probably just say the easiest path there is to just, improve the OpenAPI spec through however you're generating it. But if that's not possible for whatever reason, there's a lot of overrides that are possible in the Stainless config itself. And so you can always go into the Stainless config and sort of override things where maybe Fast API is not generating the spec in the way that you'd like. And you don't really want to, move off of Fast API or monkey patched or whatever. Just editing the Stainless config should work for that. The other thing that I actually forgot to mention in the demo, but I think is really cool, is so we give you this, the staging repository out of the box. You'll give us, in Browserbase's case, their production repository lives within their organization. If there's ever a case where you want custom code as part of your Stainless SDK, we find those cases are pretty rare. We give you a lot out of the box. And again, customizing like your Stainless config can get you a lot of the way there for stuff that people might think they want custom code for. But if it's like, you're doing something really bespoke and you want custom code functionality, our custom code system is like incredibly robust. The way that it works is you just make commits into your production repository. So like, if I'm Browserbase, the generated code maybe you'd like hop in here and say like, I want to like, I want to add something to the index.ts file, whatever it might be. You would just push change to the index.ts file, which was stainless generated initially. And then we're going to track that change throughout the life cycle of your SDK builds. So maybe, I've added a new export from index.ts, and then, a week or so later, there's a change to the OpenAI spec. Stainless workflows run again in the background and generate a new build of your SDK for you. That additional export that you added persists in the newly like stainless generated SDK builds. And so it's basically like infinite flexibility. Like there's literally no limits to what you can do with that system. It is like, it's a repository that you own and control fundamentally. And we're just trying to help you out as much as we can by like generating the stuff that you don't want to manually write.
And it really is, just a very standard, developer workflow at that point, right? It's like having stainless as an additional engineer like on your team.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's a great way to describe it. I might steal that for like sales calls and so on. But the other thing that makes that possible is the code that we generate is really human readable. So, I mean, you look at this as a developer and, if I wanted to add a new client option, it's pretty clear where I would do that. And so because it's like the code we generate is like having a really good engineer on the team writing that code for you, extending it is really straightforward. Like you can kind of peek into the SDK and guess where you might want to add something.
Alex, great demo. Thank you very much
for
showing us that. And thank you very much to Browserbase as well for letting Alex show us that as well.
Yes.
I appreciate having a real life project to take a look at that other people, especially people that are watching this video, if you want to go check that out, then you can find the example on GitHub so you can see exactly what came out stainless if you really want to. Alex, this is the point where I like to try and grab a little bit of information out of people if I can. Based on where you are and the company that you work for, obviously developing SDKs is a big part of companies' go-to-market strategies. But actually having the SDK is just the starting point a lot of the time. Do you have any tips or advice on how companies can actually go further with their developer marketing around the SDKs once they actually have something they've developed, either with stainless or otherwise? What are some of the things that they can do to actually ensure that people are adopting it, contributing to it, using it?
Yeah. So the first one I'm going to say, and this is going to sound obvious, but we sometimes see customers that don't do this. You really should talk about your SDK and you should, make it an aggressive part of your launch strategy. One of the really cool things about Browserbase is that when they announced their Series A, the SDKs were a core component of that like marketing push. Now, of course, maybe your company isn't like API first in the way that Browserbase is, so maybe that wouldn't make sense for you. But wherever you're already talking to developers, whatever like channels you're using, you should really like aggressively tell them about the SDKs that are available, because SDKs are something that they want. You are not annoying the developers in your community by telling them that they no longer manually need to like write fetch calls out themselves. Like they're quite excited to adopt SDKs. I don't know that I can share any specifics publicly, but we do have customers who've shared with us that, on the order of 80% of their API traffic comes from their stainless generated SDKs. And that's like not uncommon at all. So if you build SDKs, like users will come. But of course you do have to let them know that those SDKs exist. So that's part one. The cool thing about stainless SDKs is, they're really, really well typed. We give you good readmes out of the box. So they're quite like self-documenting in that way. And so once you sort of publish it, it's like people can really start to like explore your API and see endpoints and things that they may not have known existed before. And so we think that just doing the initial publish of your SDK through Stainless actually gets you, and just telling people that it exists gets you a long way. The other thing that I would push though is like think about the tutorials and like the workflows that people want to do with your API, and really integrate the SDKs into those tutorials and workflows. Again, it's going to make the tutorial a lot cleaner if you're not setting up a bunch of like boilerplate. If you're just making, client.accounts.create. If you're making that call, it makes the tutorial a lot cleaner. But really integrate your SDKs into those tutorials and then build those tutorials for the workflows that are most common for your users. And those are the kind of resources where even, spending, an afternoon building a guide to the most common use cases and publishing that to your doc site is like, incredibly helpful for developers in getting started.
Well, look, it's been a big week in Stainless world, right? You announced some pretty big news. I could say what it is, but I think we should hear it from you. What was the news that you announced this week?
Yeah, so this is a timely call. So we announced a $25 million Series A, led by Andreessen Horowitz, which is really exciting for us. We're a small company right now. We're about 20 people, but I think we're only really. And this is like, maybe a little trite to say, but we really are only just getting started. Like the SDK generation is one component, but if you even look at what Alex is doing at Stripe, where there's so many things that you could be doing around making great developer experience, and there's so many ways that we could productize that for people. For us, the Series A is like the way that we sort of push that vision forward, and it's cool. It's a vote of confidence. We think our customers are the best vote of confidence. Like, you look at who's using Stainless, and it's pretty clear there's a reason why they're doing it. But it's cool to see, investors and like the broader world kind of like catch on to, API first being something that's, matters a lot now, but will matter even more in the future.
2025 is just around the corner, and obviously it's going to be a big year for Stainless, but I think it's going to be a pretty big year in the world of APIs in general. What do you think we're going to be seeing through 2025 in terms of trends and new tools and adoption of certain things coming up throughout that year?
I think we made it like almost throughout the entire conversation without mentioning AI, which is cool. So I think we deserve some award for that. But I do think the developments that are happening in AI are really exciting. And one of the big ones that you're seeing is things around like agents and tool use and sort of the AI models, taking action on your behalf. And where we see this going is in order for those, agents or tool use models to really do their job effectively, they're going to prioritize heavily the companies that provide them really excellent APIs, really excellent SDKs, really awesome documentation for those APIs. Before Google, SEO wasn't a thing. Who cared like how good your, like the tags in your HTML like metadata were? Why would it really matter? But then Google comes along and it's like, well, you get prioritized in Google in large part based on like how good the metadata you're able to provide to Google is that tells Google what you are and what you do. And we think like APIs are going to be like quite similar. Now everybody on earth has like, they can open up ChatGPT and they have access to like a really good developer. And so now that everyone has access to a really great developer, that really great developer is going to want to hit really great APIs and it's going to prioritize that. So we think the sort of default case for companies going forward, this may happen in 2025. It sort of depends on how quickly you think the industry is going to progress. But I do think that within like the next 5 years, like companies building with really strong APIs is going to become the default, where now, you've got your Stripes, your Anthropics, your Cloudflares, the companies that are sort of targeting a developer audience who are prioritizing their APIs. We think that's going to basically be most companies in the future.
So there we go. That was Stainless barreling into 2025 with a $25 million Series A in their bank account. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give it a like and remember to subscribe to the channel for weekly videos on all things API development and best practice.